the steep hills beside the town of Petros in Morgan County. Tennessee's Brushy Mountain State Prison carved a spot in the nation's history of crime and punishment.
Prisoners that were really a problem, they would be threatened with being sent to Brushy Mountain.
The prison shut down in 2009. Now its bars have gone from hard time to hard liquor.
Tennessee whiskey.
A distillery and a tourist attraction.
Being built in 1896, it operated as a prison for 113 years. You get to experience some of that.
Trying to profit on the prison brings Brushy's history full circle, because the whole reason Tennessee built this prison in the 1890s was to make money. A decision that only came after a bloody battle at the town of Coal Creek over the previous system of making money on convicts. After the Civil War, southern states were broke, so convicts were for rent. The state leased inmates to private companies to work in coal mines. The system not only made the state money, it saved money, because it did not have to house prisoners. The companies built their own stockades at the mines.
By the 1890s, the system had gotten corrupt.
It was de facto slavery.
But there was another injustice. All this cheap convict labor took the jobs of free coal miners. In 1891, at the town of Coal Creek, the miners fought back. They raided prison camps, tore down stockades, put the guards and the inmates on a train, and sent them out of town. The coal companies sent the inmates back, and the governor sent troops to protect the prison camps. It was a showdown.
Free miners in Tennessee faced the state's militia in an armed battle.
The troops eventually overwhelmed the miners, but the fighting shed light on a shameful system of leasing convicts.
The miners lost the final battle, but they won the war when the state abolished convict leasing.
By banning the system of leasing prisoners, the state would lose rent money and have to build prisons. The solution was for the state to get into the coal mining business for itself. Geology experts inspected sites all across Tennessee and ultimately recommended buying the land and building a prison beside the town of Petros in Morgan County, because as they put it, there is no better coal property in the state.
Rather than leasing convicts to work in somebody else's mine, they built Brushy Mountain State Prison and coal mine and used their own prisoners to mine their own coal. Turned out to be a money-making venture for the state.
Tennessee would not go back to being broke. Instead, it would make a killing by forcing inmates to do back-breaking work. Convicts laid the railroad tracks to Brushy Mountain, built a 4-story prison out of wood, and then started digging for the riches below in 1896. Now, none of the inmates at Brushy were technically on death row, but there's a cemetery here for a reason. Doing time at this prison could be a death sentence.
We're going to see the Frozen Head mine. Coal that they mined here was very high in methane. It means it's very explosive. If you hit one of those explosive pockets, boom, the whole thing will go up.
Digging for coal was dangerous. The inmates doing the digging may not have known a thing about mining.
Kind of just a recipe for disaster.
Dozens of inmates were killed in mining accidents. Others were crippled for life. They worked all day, and if they stopped, they found motivation from a leather strap.
Torture, they would strip the prisoner and then they would flog him all over his body, including the very sensitive parts.
In 1932, former inmates wrote a series of articles about the horrific conditions at Brushy and how after a day of abuse underground, inmates spent the night in an overcrowded, disease-infested wooden building. They told how they had to steal food and blankets just to survive the cold nights, all to endure the slavery that came with the next sunrise. The articles got the attention of churches and politicians, and when the state's new commissioner over prisons inspected Brushy Mountain, he called it a fire trap and one of the worst things in the state. Improvements were on the way, and in the mid-1930s, the state built this new fortress of stone.
All made from sandstone, harvested on site. If you look at it from up top, you can see it is in the shape of a Christian cross. Just give them some Jesus, for lack of a better term. But yeah, they wanted to moralistically reform these people.
a place for prisoners to find redemption, with new beds and sanitation that might help the state atone for its own sins. But even with these better facilities, Brushy Mountain was still a violent hell.
It's a very volatile work group. These are convicted criminals that you are putting in a hole together.
Inmates killed inmates. Even guards killed other guards. And the mines remained a death trap. Prisoners who took all they could stand stood up for themselves the only way they could. They went on strike and refused to work. You can force hundreds of people down into a mine, but it's a lot harder to make them come out.
Ratio to guards to prisoners was not always a favorable one for the guards.
And at least half a dozen times, inmates took guards hostage and refused to come out of the mines until their complaints were heard. Those prisoners who made trouble paid a painful price. The state would lash the leaders of strikes. And some were suddenly diagnosed as insane and sent off to a mental institution. The madness of this coal mining operation continued until the mid-1960s. That's when yet another cave-in killed a couple of inmates convicted of relatively small crimes. All these accidents, combined with the fact the mines were no longer making money, led the state to shut them down for good. The last lumps of Brushy Mountain coal came out of the ground with the inmates in 1966.
Here's your coal, all over the ground here.
Now, these mines were closed for good, but what do you do with all the inmates? They don't have a job anymore, and you have all these idle hands with even more time to do the devil's work. Not to mention, plot ways to escape. Stay with us for that as we head back to Brushy Mountain. High stone walls and a horseshoe of rugged hills gave Brushy Mountain the reputation as a place impossible to escape for long.
The mountains are more of a prison than the prison is. There's only one way in, one way out, and that's the mouth of the valley through Petros.
People do anything to try to escape. And if you'll notice, you can see this is where the screen wire is. One night, 5 other guys decided they was going to escape. Take a sheet and knot it up, and they fixed it where they could swing it up there and hook in up there. So they was trying to escape that night. And the guards, and they come in on them. And one of the statements one of them made says, don't shoot, you can't blame a man for trying.
Some wardens portrayed the prison as Tennessee's Alcatraz, but people escaped from Brushy Mountain Prison all the time. Because inmates were not just kept in a cage, they were constantly moving back and forth to the prison's farm a few miles away and up to the coal mines.
There were convicts up and down the mountain.
A search of the Knoxville newspapers from 1922 to 2009 shows hundreds of articles about killers on the run from the prison in Petros. They escaped on foot, they stole cars. One inmate was even on the lam on a stolen mule. They did whatever they could to get away from the abuse and a deadly job in the coal mines.
Geologically, I would not be digging and tunneling here. This is shale right here, and as you can see, very easy to break.
Cave-ins were common, where they had to blast coal free with dynamite But in 1938, the prisoners blasted their way to freedom by tunneling their way in the mines clear to the other side of the mountain. Not only did you have 38 convicts on the loose, they had dynamite. Many times the average citizen would capture inmates on their property, but some families would lock their doors and actually put food and clothes outside. So if a fugitive came along, they'd get what they needed and keep moving, instead of robbing the family or taking anyone hostage. Through the years, some escapees from Brushy committed violent crimes against innocent people in their path. William Tynes broke out of Brushy and then broke into a house in Harriman and raped a woman. That crime sent him to the electric chair. Catching convicts could be lethal. Many guards and police died trying to bring inmates back to prison. And in some cases, the prisoners killed the guards to make their escape.
He hollered out, "Shoot him."
In 2005, prisoner George Hyatt was at the Roane County Courthouse when his wife shot and killed Wayne Cotton Morgan, a longtime guard who was well-liked and just a couple of years from retirement. The Hyatts escaped.
I want to sign my extradition.
Police captured them the next day in Ohio. Now a permanent memorial for Cotton Morgan stands at the new prison in Morgan County.
He had an impact on everybody he came in contact with. He's still in our hearts and our prayers every day. I mean, you don't forget somebody like Cotton.
A lot of times the fugitives did not have to make a daring or violent escape. Many were on minimum security for good behavior and given jobs as trustees.
Meaning they trusted him to do tasks that they wouldn't have the average convict doing, driving vehicles, trucks, operating heavier machinery.
And for some trustees, the temptation to take off was just too much.
I kept my doors locked.
The minimum security inmate stole a prison van and escaped while on a work detail at the county fairgrounds.
There's no indication that he's going to exhibit any violence out here. I think he just wants to get away.
Just to please turn yourself in, and we're all really worried.
Loved ones publicly begged fugitives to stop running. But other times, trustees escaped to settle family affairs. In 1950, an inmate found out his wife wanted a divorce, so he sped in a prison truck to his hometown of Jellicoe and drove through the wall of the restaurant where she was a waitress. But instead of killing his wife, he killed a World War II veteran eating lunch. The escapes and the conclusions could be dramatic. Other times, prisoners quietly came back on their own. In 1932, a homesick convict escaped through the mountains to try to make it home for the holidays. But after drudging through the unforgiving terrain, he was so exhausted, he decided he'd prefer to spend Christmas in prison.
Of course, many have tried to go up over the mountains and get out, and we know that didn't fare too well for most of them.
Now, he was not the only prisoner to beat these walls but not be able to beat the mountain. That includes the most infamous inmate in the history of this prison, James Earl Ray, the man who shot and killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Stay with us for that as we continue our series back to Brushy Mountain.
But just hearing that thing slam shut is just creepy.
Brian May with the Brushy Mountain Group has worked for years to develop this old prison as a tourist attraction. And there is one question he cannot escape.
I get asked all the time is, which cell was James Earl Ray's cell? And the real answer is he didn't have a single cell. They had to move him around quite a bit. He was never in the same cell for very long for his safety because of who he was.
James Earl Ray was a fugitive who escaped prison in Missouri when he shot and killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a hotel in Memphis in April 1968. Then Ray escaped the country, but was caught in England and brought back to the U.S. Then he escaped the death penalty by pleading guilty to murder. Just a few days after he was sentenced to 99 years in prison, Ray said he lied, he was innocent, and he wanted a trial. But too late. Then in March 1970, Ray arrived in Petros at Brushy Mountain State Prison. The warden at the time bragged nobody had to worry about an escape. Ray was just another prisoner, who immediately cooked up a plan to bust out of Brushy. On May 3, 1971, Ray made it to a tunnel that went out of the prison. The tunnel went to the steam plant, and his scheme melted in 400-degree heat. Still, Ray did not give up on getting out. In February 1972, guards caught him sawing a hole in the ceiling.
James Earl Ray never has been tried. He claims to have been coerced and tortured into pleading guilty.
By 1976, Ray was back to pushing his conspiracy theories to get a new trial. He said he was framed and had information that proved the FBI killed Dr. King.
I feel that we have a moral obligation to Dr. King to see Ray. We need to know the role of the FBI in the assassination.
As the idea of a commission to fully investigate King's assassination started to gain momentum in Congress, Ray finally made it over the wall on June 10, 1977.
The Brushy Mountain State Prison in Petros. 7 inmates went over the back wall with a makeshift wire ladder.
They went over this area right here. There was a small opening in that wire. They went through that.
Ray has once again been put on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
The FBI's involvement in the manhunt immediately added to conspiracy theories that the government somehow forced Ray to escape so the FBI could kill him.
There are people in the world that would like very much for James Earl Ray to be dead so he cannot testify before the Congressional Committee.
After 2.5 days on the run, the local boys and bloodhounds from Brushy sniffed Ray out of the wilderness alive and exhausted, just a few miles from the prison.
He had laid down, covered himself up with leaves, pulled leaves over him, and the dog team walked up on him and took him in custody.
Search teams caught all 7 fugitives within a few days. Then the prison officials began to catch criticism.
They have to answer questions like, how do you hide a 16-foot ladder in a prison? Why was there no guard at the guard post nearest the escape point? And was there any outside help in aiding the escape?
One of the guards said he tripped over his own rifle and then accidentally locked himself in the watchtower during the escape. The warden fired him. Then the state gave him his job back.
The commission found that while the guard was negligent, prison officials were more negligent.
Ray finally got a trial, but not the one he wanted. He was tried and convicted for his escape from Brushy. The jury added another year to his sentence. And during the trial, Ray met WBIR courtroom artist Anna Sandhu.
Feelings between James Earl Ray and Anna Sandhu were mutual.
I plan to marry James.
Why?
Because I love him a lot.
But James Ray is a convicted murderer. How do you feel about marrying a convicted murderer?
Well, first of all, I know that James is innocent.
Ray's escape added pressure for Congress to investigate King's assassination before the man with all the answers could escape again.
And James Earl Ray will testify in public for the first time since the King assassination.
Well, no, I'm just going to make, they give me permission to make an one-hour statement about my activities, and I assume they'll cross-examine me, and that will be about it.
In August 1978, Ray told Congress he was framed by a mysterious man named Raul. His story went nowhere, and Ray went back to Brushy. In November 1979, he tried to escape for a 4th time.
2 dummies were placed in the beds complete with human hair from the prison barber shop.
They went through a fan in the top of the building.
But guard Lorraine Robinson saw someone sneaking along the wall and stopped Ray in his tracks.
So I got my shotgun and went out and fired a shot and hollered, halt.
Did you have a feeling beforehand when you that it might be him?
No, I had no idea. Please step back.
Ray would make it out of Brushy a couple of years later when 3 inmates attacked him in June 1981.
Ray underwent surgery for 22 stab wounds to the face, chest, and arms.
About 77, I think it was 77 sutures to close these wounds, but none of them were dangerous.
Ray survived, and the state sent him to the prison in Nashville. For the next decade, he would move back and forth between the two prisons, and during that time got a divorce from Sandu, who then told a very different story about his role in the King assassination.
I said, James, you sound like the kind of person who could have really killed Dr. King. And he said, yeah, I did it. What if I did?
Glad to meet you.
Ray went back to prison in Nashville and died there in 1998 of kidney disease and liver failure at the age of 70. But long after his death, Ray's crimes, his conspiracies, and his many attempts to break out live on as an infamous part of history. Brushy Mountain will never escape.
You know, I'd say James Earl Ray is the most famous prisoner ever here.
All of James Earl Ray's escape attempts came in the 1970s, a really brutal time to be here at Brushy Mountain. We're going to hear from the inmates involved in one of the most violent episodes in the history of this prison.
When I first come in those big steel doors out there, I thought to myself, what have I done? And I literally thought I would die right here at Brushy Mountain Prison.
Robert Gibson is a free man, got out of prison in 2011, but he had good reason to think he would die here. In the late 1970s, a murder conviction sent him to Brushy with a 99-year sentence, and death lurked around every corner.
The most violent place in Tennessee you could be. And I've seen many men stabbed and beat to death right here in this breezeway. Get trapped in here, and somebody on that end where they couldn't get out. You can't get away. If you're a snitch and you run your mouth and those type things, eventually somebody's gonna get to you.
When Gibson arrived at Brushy, he was 18 years old and illiterate. But he read the situation. He could be predator or prey.
I was wicked, had a wicked heart, wicked mind, wicked thoughts. You see those vents back there? We would take those vents off and make homemade knives out of them.
This institution here is the worst place on earth. They perpetrating murders up here.
You've got people with 150 years.
That's Gibson in 1978, from a WBIR story he never saw in prison, until now.
Wow, ain't that something? I don't... Hey, now some of these guys right here, and I'm telling you, some dangerous guys now, buddy.
Warden Stoney Lane gave WBIR unprecedented access for a brutally honest look at life at Brushy, where 3 inmates were recently killed.
And that's certainly 3 too many, but in the type of atmosphere and the type of confinement you have, it's not surprising.
Stoney Lane was one of the best wardens that ever come into Brushy Mountain Prison. Did his job, was the warden, but he treated men like men.
Lane's mutual respect for inmates made him extremely popular. But his replacement, Herman C. Davis, had an unforgiving reputation.
Nobody had no respect for Herman C.
And Gibson says the approach added sparks to an explosive environment. After a couple of years of inmate attacks, paybacks, and building tension, 2 groups were ready to kill each other.
It wound up being kind of a black and white thing, but it wasn't racial. It just happened to be black and white.
The prison sent the black inmates to Nashville to split up the groups. But in 1982, the warden brought the same men back to Brushy.
And put them right in the same unit with us. So there we are. You got a choice. We would cut our bars out. That's where Hacksaw's been cutting on that bar. You bend them 2 bars out, you can get a body through there.
Inmates hid the damage to the bars by filling the cuts with soap and paint. Gibson won't say exactly who or how, but someone smuggled a gun inside the prison. And reports at the time say a guard was fired for failing a lie detector test.
You got crooked guards inside the prisons, and money will talk on the outside, money will talk on the inside.
In February 1982, Gibson and 6 others made their move. First, by taking the guards hostage.
You come out on him. You got a knife on him. Where can he go? What can he do?
But the guards were not their target.
Forced the guards to stay down there and tuck their keys, tuck the .25 automatic to the cells of these people. They were shot in their cells.
The black inmates were fish in a barrel. They shot and killed 2 men, then shot 2 others who found a way to survive.
Somebody shooting a .25 automatic at him. Well, he come up with a mattress backwards, and that's the only reason he lived, and I thank God he lived. If Herman C. Davis, if he would have came in, we was going to shoot him, and I thank God he didn't.
And after the shots were fired, the guards were set free and the prisoners surrendered without resistance.
This problem that erupted here Monday night didn't just come up overnight.
Even the guards say the warden knew or should have known that violence was about to occur.
They didn't tell me. If the officers knew, they should have done something about it.
While the warden and the guards were in their own power struggle, Gibson and the others were nicknamed the Magnificent Seven.
It was the first court appearance for the inmates.
This old footage of their first court appearance is damaged, but even with a bad tape, you can see enough to know they were not bothered by murder and kidnapping.
There I am, look at that. BJ, John Henry Brown, they're all dead.
Yeah, that's me, what it is. Oh, you ain't crazy.
That was me. I had a foolish heart, had a wicked heart, and until I met Jesus, that was me. And that's why I always say I deserved every day that I done in prison.
The shooting at Brushy tacked on decades to Gibson's sentence, and he spent the next 4 years in solitary confinement.
So people in prison were saying there's no hope for Robert Gibson. January 5th, 1988, I got born again. Not to get out of prison, but because I was a sinner.
Gibson says most people were skeptical that someone who was an absolute demon was suddenly trying to be an angel.
No, they didn't trust me overnight. They said, just wait on, just hold on, you'll see.
But Gibson learned to read by reading the Bible. And after many years as a model inmate who helped others do the right thing, the state released Gibson in 2011.
I do not deserve to be standing right here today, free in society with no more time. And the only reason that I am is because of Jesus. Only reason that I am. Don't deserve it. Don't deserve it. But he's good. He's a good God.
He still visits the inmates and ministers at the new prison in Morgan County as a man who genuinely changed his life from a violent predator to become a man who prays.
Brushy Mountain has a history. There's been many of them get killed. And I've seen that and experienced that and don't want no more of it. You know, I've done my time and I try to give society back positive from where I was negative.
Now, when Robert Gibson got out of prison in 2011, it wasn't at Brushy Mountain. This place closed in 2009. Coming up, we're going to explain what led to that closure and also the future of this place as we take you back to Brushy Mountain.
Brushy Mountain Prison has been one of those staples of Morgan County.
From beginning to end, Brushy Mountain Prison followed a path of labor and money. It gave people in Morgan County good jobs and a unique position in Tennessee as the only prison where the guards were part of a union, so they could fight for better pay and criticize management.
Guards voted to go back to work, thus ending a strike.
Is the warden running this prison to the best of his ability, the way this prison ought to be run as far as the guards are concerned?
We've had problems here.
The end of the road for prisoners considered the toughest criminals in the state.
Brushy remained a place with too many of the worst criminals and not enough money for the necessary amount of guards.
Yesterday, 2 scuffles led to 6 guards being injured.
I wish that Tennessee had better resources, but we don't have them, and we've got to work with what we have.
But through the 1980s, there were even more cuts to the workforce at Brushy.
For Morgan County residents, that's not good news.
Well, I think they ought to just leave it like it is, because it means a lot of jobs here in Big Dress.
In the late 1990s, Tennessee began consolidating smaller regional prisons and laying off workers across the state.
There's not going to be enough security to monitor the convicts' actions. Tennessee better wake up.
In the future, there will be 1 warden instead of 2 for both the Morgan County Regional Correctional Facility and Brushy Mountain State Prison.
Morgan County leaders battled to save jobs and sold the state on making it the site for one of the new large consolidated prisons.
We had to fight for it.
The new prison could give her area a $90 million boost.
The new sprawling Morgan County Correctional Complex holds 2,400 inmates and brought another 400 jobs to Morgan County. It also brought an end to Brushy Mountain as a prison. The state left this old fortress behind for good in 2009. This historic site sat empty for years, until Morgan County voted to give Brushy another chance to make money, a distillery and a tourist attraction.
Morgan County needs economic development. We need jobs, and people are very excited about the prospects of that economic development taking place right here at Brushy Mountain Prison.
Transferring the property over to Morgan County Economic Development Board so we could then lease it and control it.
Even now, nobody gets out of hard labor at Brushy.
We've been in the banging nails phase for so long, even more exciting just because the general public gets to see what we've been seeing and experiencing for 5 years.
The restoration took a lot of time, effort, and money.
We may be the craziest people in Tennessee for trying it.
But developer Brian May says it'll be worth it.
We're really close to the finish line. This is the Moonshine Still House. It's ready to turn on. We'll be making 9 different flavors. The prison's being cleaned up and made safe so we can do tours. We'll do an RV park, some primitive camping, local farmers market, a gift shop, and restaurant. We want to do a regular monthly concert series, at least 1 or 2 huge concerts, and be able to see these cool bands in what could be one of the most beautiful settings in the entire state. And it just happens to be at a prison where we're going to make moonshine. It's kind of cool and have something here that the locals can be proud of, and we believe they will be proud once they see it and we're open.
The historical site itself is going to be preserved, and that is important to almost all Morgan Countyans.
Brushy Mountain State Prison's brutal past influenced the treatment of inmates across the country. The men kept captive here fought, died, and tried to escape a hellish existence. And now the people here fight to attract the free, willing to pay for a taste of hard liquor and the history of hard time.
When you stand on these grounds, you do feel it. The history and the people that came through this place and that ran this place, you get to experience some of that.
To go back in time, to go back to Brushy Mountain. For WBIR 10 News, I'm Jim Athene. Thanks for watching.